What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Today is Wednesday, August 7th, 2019, and I've really had a great week on the show. The Trainwreck Sports Guest Tour will continue with Degenerate Al at some point next week. I got some other guests lined up for the show as well, so you guys can stay tuned to that and keep your eyes peeled on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page, my Twitter account at Ryan Thomas Take, and my Instagram, obviously, at Ryan Thomas Take as well. So, what does Ryan Thomas have to say about Colby Covington? And not to refer to myself in that manner. I normally don't like to do that, but that is a question that I've received quite a lot. And I've touched on Colby here and there, along the way. Obviously, last week on Sunday, Ty B and I reacted and recapped Colby Covington's very impressive performance against Robbie Lawler. But I really wanted to dedicate a show to Colby Covington as far as the persona, the heel role that he is playing within the UFC right now. And in case you don't know, there are terms out there in terms of the quote-unquote fight game that are well known amongst hardcore fight fans, professional wrestling fans, and boxing fans. Terms like heel, terms like babyface, terms like marks. There's even terms for fans of professional wrestling. There's terms for boxing as far as a stepping stone, a fighter that has a big name but is kind of down and out and is used for a phenom to use as a somewhat launching pad, if you will. There's a lot of terms out there. And for all the casual new fans in the sport of mixed martial arts, there's one fighter that has essentially taken the entire operation by storm. And that is Colby Covington. Colby Covington, the now bona fide, I believe, UFC number one welterweight title contender. And Colby Covington's career, I think, is unlike any other fighter's career in the sport. You have a guy that has a lot of talent, no doubt about it. The guy can fight. The guy has intangibles. The guy has attributes that help him inside that octagon. But he's not an exciting fighter. He's not somebody that I would run to the TV to watch if he was just Colby Covington. If Colby Covington was just a guy that weighed in at 170 pounds, that fought, Damian Maia and Rafael Dos Anjos and some of the names, if he didn't talk, if he didn't interact with the fans in this way, we'd be talking about something completely different. We wouldn't be talking about Colby Covington. Nobody knows that better than Colby Covington. So that's why Colby Covington has to trash talk, has to say those things that he's said, because of the fact that if he doesn't, he won't get noticed. And it's worked. Colby Covington is the greatest quote-unquote heel, the ultimate heel in the UFC. Arguably in Ultimate Fighting Championship history, and I can attest to that due to the fact that I've been a fan of this sport since the beginning. I know the heels, the Tito Ortizes, the Chael Sonnens, the Conor McGregor-ish, if you will, the Josh Koscheck's, the Dan Hardys, the Chris Levens. Dates back. It really does. It really dates back. Some would even say the BJ Penns at one point. BJ Penn was the bad guy at one point. In certain narratives within his fights, it's certainly with George St. Pierre, BJ Penn was the bad guy. Nate Diaz. But nobody has done it better than Colby Covington. And I mean that, I don't mean better by Colby Covington's great. I mean it, Colby Covington is so annoying with the things that he says that he can get a reaction out of anyone and everyone. He is always willing to toe the line and then, quote-unquote, cross the line. And that is something that we saw as recent as this past weekend. Colby Covington put on the most impressive performance in his career. He fought a former world champ, Robbie Lawler, bell to bell, toe-to-toe, pressured Robbie Lawler, essentially made Robbie Lawler look worse than he has ever looked. And I hate to say that because everybody knows I'm a big Robbie Lawler guy. I love Robbie Lawler. But that's what happened. Colby Covington took it to Robbie Lawler. Dominated Robbie Lawler. Mauled Robbie Lawler. And after the fight, we're not talking about how Colby Covington did all that to a former champion, a legend in the sport, a guy that'll probably be in the Hall of Fame one day. But after the fight, we're talking about Colby Covington's statement post-fight, where he said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the tune of that Robbie Lawler should stay off the tracks, and he should have learned that from Matt Hughes. And we all know that Matt Hughes had that situation where he was on the train tracks, he got hit by a train, and ultimately his life changed forever. Luckily, he has a life still that he can embark on, but a life indeed that is not what it once was, physically and even mentally. Matt Hughes went through hell throughout that whole experience. And that's not something that you joke about, because the circumstances surrounding it obviously are not that great. So that's all I'm really going to say about that situation, but I will expand on that and say that it's horrible that you have a guy saying those things on ESPN, on the most high-profile stage in his career, coming off of the best performance of his career. And you got to really feel for some of the fans out there that are new to the sport, that want to tune into the sport and enjoy it, and you have a guy that is entertaining in his own right. He says some things that are pretty funny, but does some other things that you kind of scratch your head at. Having the porn stars in his Instagram videos. Having the Make America Great Again hat on. Bringing the Trumps to his fight. You know, he almost forces his agenda onto people, and it just makes people feel uncomfortable. Whether they are a supporter of the president, whether they are a supporter of the Republican Party, or whatever you want to call it, even they feel uncomfortable. And without putting my political interests out there, I support the process of the country. Whoever gets elected, I'm supporting him. I'm not going to bash him or her. I'm not going to do that. But I definitely don't want my politics in my country mixed into the politics of my sports. And that's what's happening. From Colin Kaepernick to Colby Covington, whether you agree, disagree, I just don't want it involved in sports. Period. That's my opinion on it. I just don't want a fighter or an athlete. I don't need... me as a fan, they can do it, obviously. I just don't want to see that. You know, I want to see the action. I want to see the actual sport. I'm a sports guy, obviously. I really feel as if Colby Covington is doing something that nobody has ever done. This is not a page out of anybody's book. This is not a page out of Chael Sonnen's book. This is not a page out of Conor McGregor's book. This is not a page out of any professional wrestler, Ric Flair, Kurt Angle. Although I will say that is a fair and fond example of how Colby Covington does get it right. He wears the stars and stripes around his shoulders heading into a fight. Can't say I don't respect that. I love that. I love this country. No doubt. Best place on earth. But he walks out to Kurt Angle's And in between, it's you suck. So he's embracing this heel role of wanting the fan. He wants the fans to not like him. Very rare. Very rare. Not a circumstance in which that we are accustomed to in sports, where a player doesn't want the fans to like him. But what he is doing is he is getting a reaction out of those fans. A reaction that says, I don't like this guy. This guy's a jerk. This guy is ignorant. This guy is this. This guy is that. But I have a feeling that this will really rear its head in a very negative way, and you do not want to see that happen. And I think it will rear its head in an ugly way due to the fact that Colby Covington supports somebody that not many people really like right now, and that is Donald Trump. And when you mix politics and sports, when you mix politics into the promotion of a fight, it's not good. Because fighting, physical fighting mixed in with politics is largely protests. That's usually what happens in protests. They break out, they get into these fights, and it's all negative. It's all bad. Nobody wants to see that. We want civil debate. We want steady, coherent debate. We don't want this massive animosity, this massive divisive action being thrown into our sport. And I'd like to think that it will stop, but I think it's only actually going to, quote unquote, get worse from here. For all the people that think that it's really, really awful, in your opinion, it's only going to get worse from here. I think that it's awful that Colby Covington said those things about Matt Hughes. But Matt Hughes took it very well, and I think there's something to be said for that. Chael Sonnen made a great point today on his YouTube channel that maybe Matt Hughes knew about it. I don't know. I don't think so. If he did, he did, and that's great, but I don't think he did. And I don't think it's not good. It's just not good, plain and simple. Not right. Not fair. Not justified. But in terms of promoting in Colby Covington's career, Colby Covington had to do this in order to get his name out there. Colby Covington had to do it in order to get the fights that he wanted. Colby Covington had to do it to not only get the fights that he wanted, but win those fights, then get other fights that he wanted, climbing his way up the UFC welterweight ladder to where he is now. But there's one thing I will say upon all of this news, adding on top of all of this stuff that I've already said, is that Colby Covington has been passed over not once, but twice in the UFC welterweight title picture. He's been passed over. And the reason is because of all the reasons I've stated. The UFC really doesn't want to have Colby Covington with the new UFC belt around his waist. I don't believe they do. And it's not because he's not a great fighter. I think he is a great fighter, but it's because of all the other stuff that would come with it. Maybe as a champion, Colby Covington would tone it down just a little bit. But I highly doubt it. I think as a champion, it would only, as I said earlier, get worse. And the UFC would hope that Kamaru Usman can finish this guy and move forward. Regardless, the Usman-Covington fight is a big fight, so there's that. But you have one half of that fight that is divisive and is a little bit, I guess we could say, a little bit arrogant. And being arrogant's one thing, but being arrogant and offensive is another. Being arrogant, you can be cocky. You can have some bravado. We've seen that. But being arrogant and offensive is another. Chael Sonnen did toe those lines. He did offend a lot of people with the stuff that he said, but I don't think he ever mixed his politics into it. Not in my memory. And I think that's where Colby Covington might have went wrong. It's over the top. It's too much, but it gets the job done for him. That's the bottom line. And as far as the other fighters in the UFC, this is the next layer of this whole scenario that just blows my mind. The other fighters in the UFC, guys like John Jones, guys like Daniel Cormier, or whoever. We'll just say John Jones because that's true. John Jones is the number one pound-for-pound fighter on planet Earth. John Jones is undefeated. He's never lost. John Jones has made a lot of mistakes in his career. He's crashed Bentleys. He's tested positive for cocaine, tested positive for steroids. His career has been, safe to say, an odyssey. And John Jones is always the first guy, seemingly, the first guy to react to anything that Colby Covington does, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's in an interview. I don't get it. If I'm John Jones, the last guy I'm talking about is Colby Covington. If I'm John Jones, the last guy I'm talking about is anyone but the opponent at hand. Other than that, I'm keeping my head down and pushing forward with the fights. John Jones is lucky to even have a career with the stuff that he has done in his life. And I hate to throw shade at him for that, but that's just fact. Why step on the toes? Why even acknowledge it? Whether John Jones is right. I'm not saying John Jones is wrong. John Jones is right. The things that he says about Colby Covington, being divisive and all that are definitely right. But why even, of all the people to say stuff like that, he's the last person to be saying it. It's almost as if John Jones believes that we will just forget about the bad things that he's done in his life if he puts down other people that do bad things in their life or say things that are wrong in their life. And I don't like that. I don't like that. Fighters, UFC fighters out there, stop reacting to Colby Covington. It's only going to damage your own brand, and it's only going to inflate Colby Covington's. I'm sure Colby Covington saw the things that some of the fighters were saying about him and was smiling ear to ear. This guy is the ultimate heel. He does not care if he's liked. He does not care if he's disliked. He loves it. He loves any reaction, which is why he's where he is. And he's one step away from owning, in my opinion, the most prestigious title in UFC history, the welterweight title. You look at this welterweight division, the history of the welterweight division: Matt Hughes, George St. Pierre, Matt Serra, 3 Hall of Famers. Tyron Woodley defended the belt a few times. Robbie Lawler, Johnny Hendricks. You've had some real good champs at 170. Whether they were short-term champs or long-term champs, there's been some great champions at that weight class. And Colby Covington is one step away from getting that title shot. Now, that whole situation is murky as well, because you have Colby Covington coming off of this dominant win over Robbie Lawler, a guy nobody wanted to fight. Ben Askren didn't want to rematch him. Tyron Woodley didn't want to rematch him. No one wanted to fight Robbie Lawler. No one wants a piece of Robbie Lawler. Colby Covington signed that fight on 4 weeks' notice and ultimately had no training camp due to the fact that he had a cut on his eye that required him to cover it with makeup during the weigh-ins. It's a very serious cut that he had on his eye. So Colby Covington's stock, as far as in his fighting career, is at an all-time high. And he doesn't care what he says because he knows that his stock as a fighter is there, so he can say whatever he wants. But you do have a deep division at 170. You do have Jorge Masvidal, who did just knock out Ben Askren in 5 seconds. You do have Leon Edwards, who is winning every fight he's ever fought in, it seems like. So you got something there. Could Colby Covington be passed over again? I highly doubt it. He's been passed over once for Darren Till, once for Kamaru Usman. Both guys were ranked far lower than Colby Covington when they were given their title shot. So it's Colby Covington's title shot. And that scares me. That makes me fearful. That makes me wonder, how negative will this promotion for this fight be? But on the other hand, how often will we want to see that promotion? Because it's almost as if it's a train. It's a car wreck. It's a car wreck. We're driving down the road. We see two cars that have crashed into each other, and we slow down a little bit. And I think that's a problem with society today. Not to get political here, but among the many problems that society has, I think just that curiosity of seeing others in horrible circumstances, whether we want to help them or whether we're just passing by. I think if we want to help them, obviously it's great, but if we're just passing by, it's like, why do people turn their heads at that stuff? I'm the type of guy that when I see a car accident and I see the authorities there, I see the paramedics there, I see everybody there, fire trucks, I leave it to them. They'll take care of these people. I'm looking away. But in terms of fight promotion, as well as the car wrecks, people love to see hostility. The biggest selling fight in UFC history was Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor. That was a fight that featured a ton of hostility, a ton of political beef, and it was negative. I hated it. I hated the promotion leading up to that fight. I didn't find it entertaining at all because it really didn't dive into the fight itself, dove into stuff that I really don't care about personally as a fight fan, because as a fight fan, I want to watch the stuff that matters, promotion about the fight and the fight itself. Nothing else. And when promotion gets a little awry, that's when you got to take a step back and say, what the hell are we doing here? With Chael Sonnen, I think what makes him the best promoter of all time of his own fights is that his promotion was centered around his fights. Anderson Silva, that's all he did was talk about how he was going to destroy Anderson Silva, end Anderson Silva. Threw a little insults here and there, but the main premise of all of his statements was that he was going to destroy Anderson Silva, so that he was going to destroy John Jones. And whether he achieved that or not doesn't really matter. He got people to tune in and believe that he could. And for a while, he was. He just didn't finish it off. In the case of Anderson Silva, John Jones, he was severely outmatched. I think that's safe to say. But with Colby Covington, there's people that do like this. There is a market of people that do like this. And I think that's okay. I won't go against that market and say that it's not okay that anyone supports Colby Covington. I think Colby Covington's a great fighter. I'm a fan of him as a fighter. But outside of the cage, I think he's taken it a little too far. Just a little too far. But that's what the ultimate heel does. The ultimate heel takes it way too far. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. My thoughts on Colby Covington, the ultimate heel in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Tune in as I dive into more topics within the week around the wide world of sports. And also, join the takeover. Follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. Subscribe to the Apple Podcast channel, as well as follow the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Spotify. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.